Well, today every industry is going through a phase of disruption, either technological or due to competition from unexpected grounds. So to get a perspective on disruption facing the industry and how a company is really tackling it, let me invite on stage Mr. Umang Vohra, MD and Global CEO, Cipla, Mr. Rajiv Kaul, Executive Vice Chairman, CEO and Whole-Time Director, CMS Infosystems, Mr. T.R. Ramachandran, Group Country Manager, India and South Asia, Visa, Mr. Seshagiri Rao, Joint MD and Group CFO, JSW Steel, and Mr. Vasanth Kumar, Executive Director, Max Fashion India. Moderating the discussion will be Outlook Business Deputy Editor, Kripa Mahalingam. Welcome, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause for our panel? And Kripa, over to you.
Anyways, fine. I can take a seat. I will get that.
Hi, Rajiv.
You can probably sit there. I guess. Here, I can sit here.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to moderate this next session on dealing with disruption. Change is constant in today's world, and disruption can come from unexpected quarters, and more importantly, when you least expect it. Well, technology is driving most of these innovative disruptions. Pricing wars and regulatory changes can also change the landscape of any business. To understand better how industry is dealing with the constant change and disruption, we've put together an eclectic panel of CEOs across sectors to tell us more about what possible disruption they see in their business today and what they're doing about it. Mr. Kaul, I'm going to start with you. You manage the largest cash management system in the country today. Yeah. And it's possibly seeing cash is possibly seeing the biggest disruption today in India. So starting with demonetization, so what do you do when overnight 75% of your business gets affected? What were some of the learnings, and how are you preparing for the digital transformation?
That's good enough for a book by now.
We got 30 minutes.
Well, I call it demon to just save on time, right? Demon or demon. So when I started, it started from being just a crisis. That's all, right? It's a national crisis.
Right.
Then we said, "Desh ke liye karna hai, desh ke liye karenge." We didn't realize it. Very soon, it seemed to be something which was going to be coming and attacking our entire business model and what we stood for, what we did. And therefore, it wasn't a thing which you got any opportunity to prepare for. You were thinking on your feet, and you were trying to just manage it virtually overnight. And for us, it was, I think for a period of maybe 3 to 4 weeks, it wasn't 75%. 100% of business was over. We had no business. And this is when we actually ramped up our business, when we heard the Prime Minister say, we got to do this as a country. And we said, 24/7, we got to go and do this. We got to help the country. And then we said, there's nothing to do. And then we tried to scatter back and figure out how unprepared we were and how do we ramp down our investments, our resources, and all. So I think there are many, many learnings, but I think this, the top of mind for us, number one, my learning, personal learning, was just learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? You have to be very comfortable not to be not comfortable, right? The learning for a team, I think, was just simply about making sure that we are thinking of the broader picture, not for ourselves. What is right for the country, and therefore seeing what we can do. I think we did a lot of work at that time to help consumers and our customers and whatnot. But keeping in mind a longer-term view, what is the opportunity for us and what is the threat to us? So I think we sort of managed to get by that time. In a period of 3 to 4 months, we went from 100 to 0 to back to 70, 80.
What were some of the things you did? I mean,
well, for us, what are the things we did? Okay. So, I'm sorry, I need to give a disclosure. We are filed for a DRHP, and therefore I'm sort of limited in a lot of ways with what I can say and I cannot say. But for us, it was a lot about simplifying the narrative. The narrative was changing and very complex at that time. And we were saying, is digital a threat? Is, as we think about it, what we've seen Visa's business at that time maybe get threatened by, by Paytm. and Paytm is getting disrupted potentially by a WhatsApp. So things are moving very fast. What Goldsmith said in the morning, the change you're seeing today is the least amount of change you'll see in the future, and the next year it'll only get worse. So I think for us, it was about moving fast. We moved very fast. We did not get frozen. We did not stop. It's a simple tip which a tightrope walker has. Come what may on the tightrope, you're on pause. You keep walking, right? And we didn't freeze even on eighth night. Eighth night, we are working trying to figure out a strategy as to what we're going to do. So I think that is the most first learning. The second learning was it's the time to make bigger, bolder bets. And what those bets are will not be backed up with any data analysis or data analytics or big data or artificial intelligence. It will come from a very strong, intuitive sense of what you think is going to happen, at least for us. Okay. And I think that paid big dividends for us. Okay.
Mr. Ramachandran, you are possibly, causing some of the disruption in Mr. Kaul's business. And I wanted to understand the whole digital drive that we have and the move to cashless economy. And he talked about how Paytm is disrupting your business to a certain extent. So what are your possible disruptions that you see, and how are you getting ready in terms of, to take it on?
Thanks, and great to be here, and good to see a lot of old faces in the audience. So hi, everybody. Firstly, I think one of our primary core objectives is that cash needs to be disrupted. So I'm sorry about that, Rajiv. I mean, it's just nothing personal.
I don't take it personally anymore. It's a national mission right now.
It's not a personal thing, But here's the deal, right? I think it's inevitable if you look at the context of India, where there's only 9% of cash of personal consumption expenditure, 1.4 trillion, 9% is digital, right? But that's sort of growing at an exponential pace post-demonetization. And to Rajiv's point, the sort of cash withdrawals which came down have gone up, but not to the level at which they were pre-demonetization, which is sort of great news, I think. Secondly, I think digital is going to disrupt payments in a very significant way, if not already done so, right? I'm just going to give you 3 instances and then shut up. Number one, I think the way all of us pay is going to be very, very different, and very many industries are going to get wiped out in the next 2, 3, 5 years' time, right? So all of us are used to paying with mobile phones today, with a plastic or whatever it is. But think about ordering coffee from Alexa, right? Think about contactless payments. Think about payments which is connected in the IoT of things, right? So in 2020, it's expected that there'll be about 7 billion mobile phones on the planet, but that's not the story. The story is that there'll be about 20 billion connected devices, 20 billion connected devices. About 75% of those will be payment enabled. Okay. So your car, your refrigerator, your prescription pills, retail, right? The rapidity at which it's going to flow through the ecosystem is going to be remarkable. And I think the advantage for all of us sitting in India is that we are leapfrogging many of these trends. Sure. We are not necessarily 5 years behind China or 10 years behind the US. We are, in fact, in many of these things, in real-time payments, for example, India is far ahead of, probably 90% of the world. And so this thing is only going to get real. And the last thing I'd say is from the retail perspective, there are going to be no cashiers in a few years from now, right? Think about that. Think about facial recognition and artificial intelligence, and you walk in and you buy your goods and walk out. And the store is, by the way, live in Seattle today. It's not science fiction, right? Mm-hmm. Think about what that do to jobs and employment in that sector. So I think it's a very fundamental, visceral trend which we are seeing ripple through the ecosystem. B2B, for example. Vaidyanathan spoke about blockchain. Think about what that does. If blockchain were to be applied in the city of Mumbai, think that what that does to a sub-registrar's office. Suddenly the parallel economy in the SRO vanishes, right, overnight, if you have decentralized ledgers. So these are gigantic mega trends, and we're living, breathing, sitting in the middle of it, and you don't realize how epochal it is.
Right. Speaking of retail, Mr. Vasanth, you've said you've looked at disruption as something, as you see, a way of doing it differently. And e-commerce has had a dramatic impact on every aspect of retail, be it pricing, be it product availability and convenience. So how are you responding to those changes, and what are you doing to kind of stay ahead of the curve?
Firstly, the word disruption itself, you treat it as a disruption when you are not familiar with that.
Right.
The more you are familiar with how the industry is changing, you will no longer treat it as a disruption. You need to sort of embrace it. There is a new way of customer shopping fashion, new way of browsing fashion. You should recognize that. As an organization, it's important to also reorient so that you can address the customer needs with the current needs in a better way. Of course, the e-commerce has changed the whole paradigm. They bring into the industry a vast variety of technologies and way of fulfillment. One advantage we have is we have a fairly large retail network with the customer base, understanding them and all. So investing more in understanding the customer needs, understanding their pain points, and address it in a manner where we integrate technology and experience. So that's where we get into the omni-channel, wherein we are able to marry both. The more and more you do, the more and more you need to change your organization also, because the old way of doing things are no longer valid. You have to digitize your processes, enable the front-end staff to use technology in selling, connect through social media with end consumers, encourage your own company senior management to interact directly with the consumers, collaborate, bring in more partners who can help you through technology and the product. So you change the organization, you also understand more about the new needs of the customers, and you go about addressing it in a manner which is going to be more futuristic from a customer point of view and the company point of view. So instead of treating it as a disruption, you see it as a new way of consumption, new way of doing things, and you also change along with. That's how we see it, and that's a way forward for any successful organization.
Right. Mr. Vohra, when Cipla, introduced the anti-AIDS drugs in 2001 for less than $1 a day, the treatment, you were the disruptor, and you got the world's attention. Today, you are viewing disruption differently. And what about the change, and how are you viewing it, and what are you doing?
So, as I sat at this panel, it was a little funny. We had e-commerce, we had payments, and I was like, wow, maybe I'm at the wrong panel here.
No, everyone's getting disrupted.
Yeah, but let's start with a definition of how could disruption happen in healthcare? And I think fundamental to disruption is that you either have new users or you're satisfying patient needs better. We don't have users. We have wellness and we have patients, right? And I think for us that obviously mandates that we look at the totality of the experience. We talk about diagnosis, we talk about pill delivery, right? You mentioned e-pills and pill delivery. And we talk about compliance, right? And I think that's what we think is going to disrupt the markets of the future. And it's difficult to describe pharmaceuticals in the manner that cash and payments and e-commerce can be explained. But I'd like you to imagine a scenario where you wouldn't have the privilege of booking doctor appointments in time, and you wouldn't have the privilege and the ability to necessarily get your medications on time. And I think that's what we're solving for, right? A, who are the set of patients who don't know their set of conditions? B, they're not able to book appointments in time, because that reality is going to come to India. It's already there in the US, it's coming into India now, because just the primary load of people who need treatment is going to just be so high that it's going to be very difficult to find the doctors to treat you. So I think our model of disruption is probably to equip people to manage their own conditions a lot better. It's about their diagnosis, it's about how they treat themselves, and it's about the active monitoring. So, little like if you all run today, I think 50% of the people who actually work out in gyms today have their own things that they keep entering in the phone about, how much they ran, how many calories they burned, what their weight was, etc., etc. And there is this ability to manage your own treatment paradigm, which is what we're trying to bring in through, nicely connected sensors for you to monitor your health, your blood pressure, if you're a respiratory patient, your ability to breathe. And I think that is what we are focusing on. I think the $1 a day was the need of the hour then, because a lot of people could not afford treatment. And that's why we're dying. And that's why we took this imperative to make sure that we got $1 a day. Today, the $1 a day means many other things, right? People can afford medication. It's really about how we enhance the experience for them.
Right. Mr. Seshagiri, you probably have the most challenging job to do when it comes to manufacturing. In a global industry, you're already, there's global factors like, at play, demand, supply. And then India had inherent competitive advantages that we had low-cost labor, we had access to raw materials, and all of that took us to built our industry to a certain extent. But those competitive advantages are quickly vanishing, and with the help of technologies, other manufacturers, even in developed markets, tend to have better cost of conversion. So how do you manage to compete, with other with people who are leveraging technology better, and two, what kind of regulatory changes you have to deal with in terms of how is it that move to electric cars or move to lighter cars which are more fuel efficient? How is that going to impact your demand for steel?
Too many questions.
I know. Yeah.
So we are in the steel industry today. We are 18 million ton steel company, and we are competitive. So if I really look at it, the journey of last 20 years, there are a lot of disruptions which have happened. But still we are competitive means there are certain advantages or certain competitive strengths we have developed as a part of the business model. Whether those competitive strengths like low conversion cost, we are the lowest in the world, $115 is the conversion cost from iron ore to finished goods. Similarly, we are very good in completing the projects within the time and within the cost. So our capital allocation is very, very good. And we have a very good product mix. So these are certain competitive advantages which made us today what we are. As regards to today, the kind of changes which are happening and whether these competitive advantages will make us to remain as competitive in future, if that is the question. You look at what happened in the last few years, even the last month, if you look at it. Steel, if I have to produce, I need raw material, that is iron ore. Iron ore is available in India. Because it is available in India, we invested a huge amount of money in steel plants. So in 2011, for instance, in the state of Karnataka, because of environmental pollution which was happening, the Supreme Court suddenly said from tomorrow there is no iron ore mining in Karnataka, so mining ban, which has happened. When you invested 50,000 crores and the next day if regulatory change or judiciary directive, if iron ore is not available, you have to manage the situation. We thought it is one of the factors or one-off event which has happened. We thought at that time, we tried to manage, we came out of the problem. How we have come out of that issue, I will just explain to you. After that, we have seen in Orissa, 2 months back. So they said all these mines are closed from tomorrow. If you don't pay huge amount of fines, iron ore is not available. By that news itself, whether iron ore is available or not is a second issue. The prices, iron ore prices went up by 30-40% in the domestic market. You have to manage that volatility. Just few days back, you must have seen Goa iron ore mining ban. So the point which I am saying is today environmental law is becoming so strict. Either it is asked by the society or by the government or by the customer. Because of that, there is a huge amount of pressure on the industry in sourcing. Not only you have to ensure that your supplier is complying with these environmental restrictions and he will be able to supply the raw material by complying with those conditions. So this is one big challenge or big disruption which we are seeing by way of a change in the environmental regulations that are happening in India and also across the world. So therefore, when we have to operate the steel plant, if such disruptions happen, where you are getting raw material source in your supply chain, suddenly it disappears. Then how do you manage, how do you produce, how do you meet your customer requirements is one challenge which we have seen, which a disruption which we have seen in the past, and we managed it and we continue to work on that, how do we do it. The way we did in the case of 2011, we have a 10 million ton steel plant, and then iron ore is not available within 24 hours. Then what we could manage the situation, one is imports, getting iron ore from outside the state of Karnataka. The second is we identified iron ore already mined and available with various mines nearby our plant, which cannot be used by other steel plants. Because we went ahead and invested in one beneficiation plant. Beneficiation plant is nothing but very low-grade iron ore which cannot be sold in the marketplace. We can take that and then beneficiate it to high grade and use it. Iron ore mining ban has happened, but this iron ore already mined could not be sold, that was available. Our intention was to reduce the cost. So we invested large amount of money in beneficiation plant which was ready. Then we went to the court and we said this iron ore is available, no mining is required. Please permit us to use this item, which is waste material. So court has permitted us. So we could source that and run the plant and keep the plants operating. So keeping that in view, what could happen in future if such events happen, how do we manage the situation? We went for slurry pipelines. We went for alternate sources of getting iron ore. That is how we managed this type of situations that may arise in future, so we can handle that. We have seen several displacement threats which we have seen in the past, like China dumping steel into India. That also we could manage in the past. Now the issue remains is this competitive strength of conversion cost that is getting displaced today, that is because of technology. For instance, labor cost of JSW steel is $16 per ton. This is the world's, maybe I should say it is the best. Same thing if you compare, when I want to compare with any European company or any US company or any Asian company other than China, then it is almost 2-3 times more. So because of the technology, now this conversion cost advantage or the labor cost advantage is disappearing. If that disappears, then I have to be relevant to my customer. I have to be cost competitive. So what is that we can do in order to reduce our cost further? Thereby, I will be able to compete in the marketplace. So to address those issues, we have taken a lot of steps in our process innovations and empowering the total cost management digitally. So one or two examples which I can give it to you. For instance, we take the power from the grid or from long-term PPAs we have signed with one company and take the power. So when you take the power, if you are not able to use the power, again balance power you have to again inject into the grid. But that is free. In Maharashtra, if you see, when you buy the power and if you are not able to use it and it goes back to the grid at free of cost. That cost is 100 crores we are losing per annum. So we thought there is a way of reducing this cost. Then digitally, is there any solution? If we have to say there is a 15-minute cycle, every 15 minutes you have to tell to your generator, this is what I am going to use in the next 15-minute cycle. So you only produce that much and inject. Thereby, I will be able to match my requirement with the total drawdown of the power. So digitally, we found a solution. Now we are able to say that the generation and the demand is matched by way of a digital solution. We could save almost now 50% of the total waste which we have done. Same solutions in the case of logistics. Like that, there are various ways where we are able to reduce our costs and to be relevant. Then at the same time, substitute material. If you look at roofing, for instance, earlier asbestos were used. Now steel is a better material. So we went and said, galvanized sheets if you use for roofing, in fact, it is not only healthier, it gives a long life, and the replacement is maybe 20-25 years. Therefore, you should use for roofing galvanized sheets. So we started giving the galvanized sheets to the customer. So most of the northeastern states today, asbestos is not used, galvanized coils are used, galvanized sheets are used. Then in order to facilitate that, when somebody wants to use galvanized sheets, he wants nuts, he wants bolts, he should know how to fix it. So that was service we attached while giving the galvanized sheets in the retail market. So that has gone up. Then zinc price has gone up substantially because galvanizing demand has gone up, sheets ka. Then we introduced Galvalume, aluminum coating relative to zinc. So therefore, there is always ways and means of reducing cost. It can't happen because there is a disruption happening in the marketplace. So you have to find new ways of managing the cost and then finding new solutions to be relevant and competitive in the market.
Mr. Kaul, when you were up against a national mission to go cashless, what is your strategy long term to kind of battle that, and how do you see the digital drive kind of impacting your business? What are you doing to get ready for that when that happens? Or it's already happened?
That's what my board wants to know. So I think, I just want to set context to this in a couple of different ways. The one is, I get the theme, doing more with less, and all of these are very important for all of our businesses. This is what you do to survive nowadays. But for us, I think you need to define what business you're in, right, in the long term. Now, you asked me a question saying, what is long term? So I have a 5-year long term, I have a 10-year long term. Unfortunately, like some other business leaders, I don't have a 50-year long term today. But I have a 5 and 10-year long term. And the 5-year long term for us is nothing really has changed. We've had a step function shift when I look at the data. Trends are back to what they were at a different pace. Cash is back to 98%. It's growing 12% a year. It was growing 12% a year earlier. Cash and delivery in e-commerce is 60%. It was 60% before. But am I getting comfortable with that? No, I'm not. I'm assuming there will be a shift at a rapid pace, and how do we get ready for it? And our vision was about how do you make cash available anytime, any place at the lowest cost. And we've been working to bring down our operating cost to now the lowest in the world. And I don't mean comparing it to the US. I'm saying comparing to Nepal or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. Comparing to developing economies, we have brought down our unit cost of delivery to the lowest. We think that is important to stay competitive. Now, if consumers someday see a big need to move into a digital form of payment, we don't have a business, that's fine. But I think a lot is said about digital inclusion or financial inclusion through digital means. I think I question disruption is cool, is sexy. You have to ask and question the common narrative because somebody should ask the question. And my point of view is digital payment a bogeyman or is it a leprechaun? It's like, I'm sorry, I hope I don't insult anyone here, but a lot of fintech companies, gabbar aayega, Paytm aayega, gabbar aayega. That's the big danger, right? Now, I don't know what happened to them. We'll figure it out, right? My point is, what is the real India need? Right. And how do they transact will not get influenced by pumping in billions of dollars into technologies. We'll see how consumer behavior changes. So our 5-year plan is very, very clear in our head, which is we want to be the biggest in what we do. We are large. We are 25% share. We think there's a market to get to triple our business in the next 5 years. The 10-year view is where we think that our reason for existence will be very different than what it is today. And that will be about solving and adding value to our primary customers, which is banks, and helping them solve problems which they are not able to do themselves today.
Like
Today it is, let's say, how do you make the whole cash cycle efficient? So we're starting doing a lot of work with the regulators and policymakers on how do you make the cash cycle more efficient. We're saying India can manage with lesser cash. We don't have a problem with that. We just think there's a big opportunity in making the cash cycle more efficient, and we want to drive that efficiency and automation. The second is when look at India and banks, the outsourcing they do is so primitive still, given the need. We think that will change and will go beyond just cash, which is tougher for them to manage, into a lot of business functions. And we would love to be the leader in outsourcing of financial services, whether it's to an NBFC or a housing finance company or to a bank. So therefore, what we are doing now is we are starting to accelerate our investments for the 10-year long-term plan. We are, of course, accelerating the investments for the 5-year plan, but we're also saying we need to take 5 to 10% of profits and invest it now for the 10-year plan.
Right. Mr. Ramachandran, how do you kind of, he believes that, digital payments may not be the big disruption that he needs to be worried about. So how do you see that playing out? And, how you talked about a lot of connected devices and, the options for payments becoming a lot more options for the consumer. But the basic habit, it's the biggest challenge would be a habit change, and how would you kind of overcome that? And
No, I agree. I mean, so both internally and externally, I think, I agree with Rajiv, the role of technology is overstated, but also I think the human factor is oftentimes understated, right? So you're dealing with a cliffhanger of a cultural change from an external perspective. And I think if you ask all the panelists around this stage, they will tell you that the hardest thing to do is to rewire employee mindset. Reskill, retool, upskill, because what was relevant from a skilling perspective a decade ago is absolutely relevant 5 years out, but that doesn't mean that those valued employees suddenly become redundant, right? I think the onus is on us as leaders as what we can do to recognize the vulnerability, accept it, not deny it, and say what can we do thoughtfully and sensibly as management to lead our employees in a direction that, you made the point about not being afraid of disruption, but embracing it, right? So how do you sort of prepare your employees? I think it's a very, very important management subject, which is oftentimes not spoken about as often as it should be. So I'd say dealing with culture externally and dealing with employees internally are super critical as we sort of transition this bridge.
But how would you work around consumer habit change? What would drive that into?
I think the cool part about being a platform business, and Visa is very much a platform business, so whether you're in the music sort of trade, you're in the medicine trade, you're in the apparel trade, I don't care. But if you're a platform, you benefit and often struggle with the network effect, right? Somebody's got to create it and somebody's got to use it. So whether it's chicken or egg, or whichever came first, I mean, you're in a poultry farm, so there are chicken and there are eggs, right? And both of them coexist. But when both of these things come at the same time, it's a beautiful thing. And just managing that network effect of, the more places you can use digitally, the more valuable digital credentials becomes for a consumer. And the more consumers pay digitally, then merchants think that they need a digital option to accept. So it's a sort of thing, it's like watching your nails grow. You don't really know when it grows, but suddenly you look down on your nails and they're overgrown after a week, right? So it's one of those things that network effects are just amazing things, but the starting friction is a big challenge, and that's what many companies are grappling with. But once you get over that first gear hump, it's a marvelous runway.
Right. So, Mr. Vohra, if talking about, he talked about the culture change and how you bring about external and internal. Moving from a generic company to kind of looking at disease management calls for a lot of change, right from top level management thinking right down to how you're reskilling your employees and how you want to. So what kind of changes are you bringing about in your company to kind of make that transition where you're moving from generics or to making generics to kind of making more specialty drugs, or even moving ahead to disease management?
So I'm going to step aside a bit. I don't think we'd like to conventionally follow generic and specialty, because I think we're really after an unmet need. Right? So there's an unmet disease need of a patient, and that's the pivotal thing around which we're solving for. And if we do solve for that, we disrupt and everything else. So if that's a given, and I like what he just said, because I was going to mention something similar, I think the change has to start with me first. If I run the organization and I'm going to ask the organization the same questions about what did we do on sales, what did we do on top line, what did we do on how are our immediate health term indicators looking like, I don't think I'm going to get the kind of disruption energy that we need in the organization. So the change is about asking the right questions. The change is about bringing in the right people, because I think when you deal with disruption, you have to have a skill set in your organization that's okay with ambiguity. Not all answers can be solved or answered today, especially if you're looking 5 years, 10 years out. You need people who are comfortable with ambiguity, right? And that's the type of people we're trying to bring into the disruption effort, people who can deal with ambiguity. What we're also doing is many of the things that we'd like to see disrupting the regular healthcare chain are not going to be innovations from inside. They cannot happen because our dominant logic in our organization, we are a pills business. Our dominant logic will kill it, right? So I think what we're trying to do is start, we just recently started our own Shark Tank, right? Where we are saying, okay, we're going to crowdsource ideas. These ideas may be from within our organization or outside. And we'll try and see how many of these we can fund, but they have to have a storyline that brings in to how we deliver healthcare. So I think we're trying to hire the right people or, repurpose the right people who have high levels of ambiguity, ability to deal with ambiguity. And then we are trying to enable the organization to things like the Shark Tank, to things like facilitative processes. We're trying to find the right sponsors. What kills disruptive thinking is the lack of, it's always a great guy with a great idea, but if you have a wrong sponsor, that idea is killed, right? So we're trying to find the right sponsors for these innovations. It's not just the disruptive thinkers, it's about people who can foster this collaboration and this thinking. So I think those are some of the things that we're starting, but then, it has to start first with us. If we run organizations, then we need to change first to enable this change in the rest of the place.
Vasanth, Kumar, when you talk about short-term goals versus long-term goals, as a CEO, you always have the balance of meeting your short-term, targets of profits and revenue growth. And then you look at long-term, the change in the business model and how you want to kind of stay ahead because of using technology. So how do you balance that out, and what kind of investments are you making in technology or in the omni-channel?
Yeah, this is a dilemma which every organization faces, particularly the incumbent who is having market share to protect. What we do is we have two separate buckets. One is the existing business, which from a brick and mortar you have to change to omni-channel. And then you have an e-commerce wing, which has to build its business purely in the e-commerce. Both have different goals. Clearly, the current business has to deliver productivity and transform into an omni-channel. So we have to get the current asset sweat better, take out costs. Again, going back to what people talked, digitization is the key. Through the analytics, through the process recrafting, we will be able to take costs out. And then make the organization more productive, more nimble, more open to outside influences. At the same time, get the right talent for the e-commerce wing so that they can participate in the new way of doing business, which is the digital way of consuming. So over a period of time, this will get married into one way, which we believe is the omni-channel way. So we need to do parallelly, one for the short term, another is for the long term, and ensure both the goals are different, but then converge towards a common goal over the next 5 years.
Okay. Seshagiri, how are you leveraging technology to kind of remain competitive, and what are the one or two things that you're doing to, either in manufacturing or supply chain that can help you stay competitive?
Technology side, that way we have identified manufacturing and supply chain plus the sales and marketing. So we are using now technology to improve these three areas and reduce the cost and to be competitive. So we are working on several projects in that direction. And at the same time, using technology to service the customer better. So in that, we have introduced recently one product called OTIF. So in this, what happens is when a customer gives an order, let us say for 1,000 tons of steel, there are different grades. We produce 28,000 grades of steel in the company. Whereas when auto customer gives an order, it is not that everything is one grade, it's different grades. Generally, the plant, what they do is that when they are producing steel, which is volume driven, where productivity is high, so they produce that grade and they supply to the customer. So if 1,000 ton order is there, they supply 800 tons, they say we have supplied to the customer. Balance 200 is not supplied. So they are high grade, number one, it takes more time, productivity comes down. Therefore, the plant focuses on producing volume. So we have to shift that volume to value going forward. Then we introduced to monitoring of the when order comes, how do you ensure that one time in full, 1,000 tons is supplied at a time to him? So in that, once we started introducing, after that when we did a customer survey, there is a huge amount of rating upgrade which has happened. Once we introduced, we know that each customer, their full order is complete or not. That itself has given a very good outcome to us. Because we are at 71%. When we introduced this, we were at 41%. So there is a huge improvement which has happened. So using technology in monitoring these factors. Similarly, when order comes to us, then which there are several locations are there, several mills are there are 66 variables where it can be produced. It was done manually earlier. Now we are using technology to do that. So there are different methods by which we are using the technology to become relevant and competitive.
Mr. Kaul, in this constantly changing world, does it even make sense to have a 5-year and 10-year kind of vision?
Yeah, of course, yes. I think before this crisis hit us, I think we had a 3-year, 4-year plan. I think, and we had one vision. We have a clear vision, and I'm very clearly saying that's the 5-year vision. That's not the 10-year vision. The 10-year vision is something we're working on. What I did want to share a little bit here to digress from what you said is a lot what happens during crisis, and I know a lot of leaders in this audience who have gone through many crises, and how companies deal with it is unfortunately very dependent on what the leader does of that company. I have been very fortunate, extremely lucky. I met Marshall 4 years ago, then met him again 3 years ago, 2 years ago, today. With that motivation, I signed up with the coach. I think that helped in many ways the way we responded to different crises and how we do. And I urge everyone to make sure they are a little more connected to the broader world and take help. So I think absolutely, I think you got to have a very clear view of how you define your business. And I think is one reason why we are still surviving and doing all right and still growing is that we have a very clear idea of what our business is all about. And we just only have to juxtapose the long-term and the short-term trade-offs and make some of those bets somehow. The good thing, as Vaidya said, it's a world where capital, thankfully, is available far more readily. It's not good for me necessarily because fintech is getting $1 billion or $2 billion, but the capital is available for strong entrepreneurs and strong teams to grow. And there will be a place for everything in the world. India, thankfully for us, I'm so lucky I'm in India because the opportunity, because again of what Vaidya said, because of lack of penetration is still so phenomenal that there is enough room to grow for the 5 years. 10 years, I think, got to figure out what are the backup plan.
Right. And Mr. Ramachandran, when you have technology and all the digital payment providers have access to the same technology, how do you then differentiate? How do you make a difference?
No, I think in a context of differentiation is not dramatically different from what you would do in any legacy industry, right? Notion of customer trust becomes super important. For example, in the digital era, we all know that India is still at a very, very nascent stage of digitization. And one false step on data privacy and cybersecurity can be sort of 1 step forward and 3 steps back. And so it's not sexy, or it's not cool to speak about what happens behind the curtains in terms of making sure the integrity of the overall sort of pipe and the billions of dollars that we spend on making sure that data privacy is sacrosanct and cybersecurity is sort of kept center on front of things is not funny, right? And so differentiation, even to what earlier speakers mentioned about bunch of money chasing entrepreneurs, it's a quality of execution that sort of differentiates one versus the other, which is why the VC hit rates are what they are. And I suspect that's not going to be dramatically different, irrespective of the business model disruption or people disruption or technology disruption. The fundamentals of running good governance, of focusing on the basics and creating value proposition to customers is absolutely what's going to, in fact, separate the men from the boys and create that sort of distinction of the leader from the rest of the pack. If it was important yesterday, it's going to be uber important tomorrow.
Mr. Vohra, when you talk about specialty and disease management, in terms of how are you addressing the white spaces in that in your portfolio? How are you going to look at kind of augmenting your capabilities when it comes to moving up to disease management?
Yeah, I think we're looking at the patient funnel, and we're looking at where in this journey of somebody being a patient and somebody seeking care, what are those inflection points where we can add the maximum? At times they're about discovering new methods of diagnosis, right? At times, for example, there's a lung test. A lot of us go for our annual health checkups, and we have this pulmonary function test where they ask you to blow and then they see everything, right? Those metrics that come in. We're trying to make that simpler, because that's a very difficult test to do, but it's being made simpler because this is again keeping an unmet need of a patient in mind. They shouldn't be going for these tests every 9 months. They should be doing it possibly every 2 weeks, right? And how do you facilitate that? So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end is really to figure out what can finally cure, right? What medicines do we have that can finally cure? Because we exist to cure people. And I think, so we're using technology, we're looking at various things down the patient funnel route. It really starts with, again, I keep going back to it, what is the unmet need? We don't program ourselves to disrupt. We program ourselves based on an unmet need that a particular patient has. And I think that's what's centrally driving our innovation thesis.
Just last final word from all of you. One thing that is on your mind when it comes to dealing with disruption, what's on top of your mind or keeps you up at night?
I think I find it very exhilarating and fun. It's a moment of extreme learning under stress, keeping on your toes to just track what everybody in India is trying to do in this entire space is it's a fascinating learning, and it's something you need to survive and to do good at. So it's good learning.
Mr. Ramachandran?
No, I completely agree. I think it's one of the best times to be alive in humanity. If you think about the rapidity of change which is happening in healthcare, in retail, in everything around you see in the world, I mean, I literally feel like a kid in a candy shop. I mean, there's so much to do and so little time and so many avenues that one could be pursuing. And yes, there's uncertainty and there's ambiguity, but that's sort of 10% of it, 90% of it is just a whole boatload of fun, and just get used to sort of floating with it, I guess.
Mr. Vasanth?
Two things which are challenging. One is building leadership capabilities down the levels of the organization. And the second thing is going for an approach of collaboration with partners and not try to do everything in-house. So these are the two things which are big challenges which we wish to surmount.
Mr. Vohra?
So for me, it's just the thrill of providing care to so many families that suffer because of diseases. But I would have to say that I am most concerned about two things. I'm concerned about relevance, right? Would we ever be relevant? Would we continue to be as relevant as we are today in the future? And I worry about whether our talent seizes the opportunity that the marketplace offers. So those would be two things that I would be concerned about.
In our company, whenever we open our laptop, it comes better every day. So therefore, it is the culture which we wanted to develop. Disruptions continue to happen either through technology or regulation or competition from any source. Which we're bettering our work than what we have done yesterday. I think that is what keeps us going.
Okay. That's about all the questions. Thank you so much for the patiently answering all my questions. I hope the audience found it as insightful as I did. And